LinkedIn News.
When we think that there is a right decision and we just have to figure out what it is, if I could just figure out what the right decision is, then everything's going to work out for me. And it puts us in this position of trying to predict how things are going to turn out, predict the future. And the reality is that there are just so many different ways that things can unfold. When we're able to release that, say, okay, if I can lean into the belief that there's no right decision here, where does that leave me?
That's personal growth educator Amanda Hilton. I'm Leah Smart, and this is Everyday Better. Stay tuned to learn how to practically define your values and use them to make critical decisions based on what matters most. Make sure you hit that follow button to get new episodes of our show every week. And if you're a regular listener, thank you, and I have a favor to ask. Consider leaving us a review so we can keep bringing you more conversations you love. By the way, here's how to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Go to the Everyday Better podcast page, scroll to the bottom, click on the stars, and then right below that, you can click on Write a Review to add your note to us. Thanks so much. Hey everyone. From LinkedIn News, I'm Leah Smart, and this is Everyday Better, a personal development podcast where every week I sit down with some of the world's brightest minds and bravest hearts who use science and story to share strategies for how we can flourish individually, in relationship to others, and to the world around us. Think about the last time you had to make a decision, maybe about whether or not to stay in a job, move cities, or clarify a specific priority over another at work. How'd you do it? If you're like a lot of us, you might have made a pros and cons list, or maybe you called a whole bunch of people to see what they thought. I call this polling, and by the way, I found it never ends well. Whatever you did, we all have our process for making decisions, but ultimately we are trying to maximize for the one that we think is the right decision and what will give us the greatest chances of an outcome we want. But what happens when the decisions are more complex than what size coffee you're going to get, or if you'll own the project your boss prefers or your peers say matters? How about when they're just more important than a simple pros and cons list? And, scary, but what if there is no such thing as a quote-unquote right decision? My guest today is personal growth educator and wellness researcher Amanda Hilton. She's built a social media following by offering guidance on this exact topic. And she says when it comes to decision-making, there isn't always one right answer. So in those moments, we have to turn to our values to help guide us toward what matters most. And today, we're demystifying what values are, and she's got a step-by-step process for the next time you're feeling stuck. I tried this out and realized I need to rework some old values and define new ones, which reinforces her point that our values change and we should come back to an exercise like this multiple times during our lives. Here's Amanda.
When I look back to when I was first introduced to all of this, first introduced to wellness and personal growth, what I really needed was an access point into it that was super practical and grounded and concrete. When I was in high school, I went through a clinical depression, very intense, disrupted my schooling. And it was at that time I was introduced to cognitive behavioral therapy. And it was the first time that I had ever really thought about the connection between my emotions and my thoughts and my actions and where my agency lay in those. And at the time, all I could find was either inspirational Pinterest quotes and follow your dream and follow your passion. There's so like a place for that.
Yeah.
But I was kind of like, I'm in, like I'm willing to do it, to follow my dream, follow my passion. But like how? Like what does that actually mean? And then on the flip side, I could see all this dense psychology research and empirical studies. And I was like, at that time, I don't even know how to read this. And so what I really needed was something that wasn't just fluffy and inspirational, but wasn't so dense. And so what I try to do now and what I love about my work is being able to take those two and try to make the personal growth really tangible, really actionable, and have it be simple, not having it be overcomplicated. So Yeah.
accessible. Yeah,
Accessible.
which I love. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. It's like you either had like the really cool little quotes that would like brighten your moment.
Right.
Right. I was going to say day.
Totally.
It's not even day. It's brighten your moment.
Yep.
And then you had this stuff where you're like, well, this isn't reachable for me, and I don't know what to do with this.
Yes. This is like too much.
How do you talk about personal development so people get it?
I think that a lot of people focus on the goals, the manifestation. That's really huge right now. And there is a lot of value in thinking about the things you desire. I think our desires are beautiful, wonderful things to lean into and to create the reality around us that we want. It's not that any of that is bad. And I think that when it comes to reaching our goals, getting the things we want in life, the most underrated element is becoming the person that we need to be in order to hold that. You know, they say new level, new devil, right? Any new quote unquote level you reach is going to come with its own set of considerations and problems. So the most important element in manifestation, goals, getting the life you want is being able to be the person that you need to be in order to hold all of that other stuff. Because we can get the job promotion, we can get the new house, we can get the new partner, we can go on all the trips. But if we have not learned how to work with our nervous system to attune to this new state of being, if we have not learned the processes of setting boundaries with others and being able to communicate that clearly, if we don't know what our core values are, how are we going to make those decisions from that new place, from that perhaps more stressful place? One of my favorite places to start when it comes to personal growth is with the topic of core values, because I think it's a really great entrance point.
What does that mean? Like, I've seen you talk about this and you know, in my own work. So I know that it can feel really broad too. It's like, what's a core value?
On the most basic level, our core values are the things that are most fundamentally important to us. For many of us, for most of our lives, our core values, we have some sense of what they are, but they're kind of operating on this subconscious level. Because we haven't taken the time to give language to them, they can also be hard to actually use. And it can leave us susceptible to other influences, whether it is ideas that we grew up with from our family coming in, or someone else's opinion, or all the marketing that we're constantly subjected to influencing what we want, what we think we want. I think that often when we're not operating out of our core values, and when I say not operating out of our core values, I think that most of us are trying to do the right thing, quote unquote, the right thing, trying to do what we think is best for us, but we don't really tangibly know what that means. So it might look like being on autopilot, kind of drifting through life, not really sure why you're doing what you're doing. You kind of know why you're making the choices you're making. You kind of know why you're picking the goals that you have, but when it really comes down to it, you don't feel connected to that in an intimate way on a day-to-day level. So it can look like just drifting, but it can look like just all this added friction. You're trying to do what's right for you, but it feels hard. It feels so hard to know what that even means. So I think that the value in taking the time to get really clear, uncover what your values are, and give language to them is that they suddenly become usable. You can actually start harnessing them, leveraging them to help you make decisions, to feel more meaning in your day.
Okay, so let's just say we're like ready to do that. What prompts are the best prompts to start defining these values? Because I know I've also heard you say, and I've seen this a million times, where it's like there's a list and there's like honesty. And it's like, yes, honesty is a value for most of us.
Yes.
We would assume, right? For many of us that it's a value.
Yes.
That then has kind of no value. It's almost obvious. So how do we start really defining this for ourselves?
Yeah, that's such a good point, because I do think there's these things that we think, oh, if I don't put that as one of my top values, it means that I don't value honesty. It means that I don't want other people around me to be honest. But
correct. Not
to
true.
your point, is not true. So I think that's why there's value in not just having this vague sense of what's important to you, but actually taking the time to define it. So like you said, oftentimes what you'll see recommended online, and I think this is a great starting place, is they have, you can Google it, there are probably hundreds out there, but these compiled lists of values, and there might be 100, 150, 200 values on there, things like honesty, kindness, integrity, family, adventure. And what you can do is you can print out one of those lists and go through them and start to cull it down. So start to circle the things that feel like they're really calling to you. When you hear that word, you're like, ooh, yeah, that's like particularly important to me. Not that honesty isn't,
Right.
but this one is like particularly central to what I want and who I am and what I believe. And so you can start there with one of those big lists. But I find that when most people stop there, they're still left unsure about, okay, now I have, this circled list of maybe 20 or 30 different values, but what do I actually do with this? Like, how do I actually move forward with this? How is this useful? And so I always recommend to go through a list of prompts, questions, and a lot of people will do this in a journal, but if journaling's not your thing, you can also like talk to a partner about it.
Whatever.
iPhone notes. One of my favorites is pressing record on the voice recorder on your phone and just like speaking it out. Just talk. So you can do it in whatever way works best for you. But to start to think about a few things, and I'll share a few questions that people might start with. One being, this one's one of my favorites. When do I feel most like myself? And it's kind of an odd question if you've never thought about it before, but like, what are you doing when you feel most like yourself, when it's easiest for you to just feel like the person that you are? So for me, when I have a Sunday and I have nothing to do, I don't have to leave the house, I can make a cup of coffee or tea and sit down with my 20 different half-started projects and hobbies. Like,
sounds very familiar.
That is me. Like, that is when I feel most like myself. And so just sit with this question, like play with it. These can be light and fun, and start to notice, what values do you see emerging when you think about that? Another one could be if you had no constraints. So no financial constraints, no time constraints. You could do whatever you want. What would you be doing? What would you want to be doing? Who do you admire and why? What values do they seem to live according to? What have been your peak experiences over the last 5 years or so? Like when you think back to what was most meaningful to you in the last 5 years, what was it? What were you doing? Who were you with? What values might have been at play there? And then another really big one is when you think back to feeling angry or frustrated or like a pet peeve was being triggered in some way. When you think back to recent experiences of that, what was going on? What value or values were being suppressed? What values were being ignored? What is that moment, that experience revealing to you about what is most important to you? That can often be a really good window in, is like when we feel frustrated, what is going on there? And the reason why these questions are so valuable beyond just circling things that feel right on the list, the reason why these questions can be so clarifying is because two people can have the same exact answer to one of these questions, but what's revealing is in the reason why. So if you're thinking of that last question with what's made you frustrated recently and you have some experience with your boss saying something or doing something, it could be the same exact situation or very similar, but one person will come out of that and realize that the value that was being rubbed up against was compassion. Like that is something that is so central to them. And it didn't feel right to them when that value of compassion was not being honored by the other person. Another person will come out of the same experience and say, that also rubbed me the wrong way. But the thing that was really central here was self-expression. Like I was stifling myself. I was not speaking my mind. I didn't feel free to be able to share what was going on for me. And so these questions can be really clarifying to dig down below the surface a little bit more.
In the second question, you mentioned this idea of like, the unlimited resources, unlimited time. What would I do? I heard someone say the other day or add in, and I was not going to be recognized for any of it. And I was like, oof, right? And that one kind of stumped me a bit because I was like, well, I mean, I absolutely love what I do now, but like, would I be gardening? I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, would it shift?
Yeah. Well, over time, as we sit with these questions, I think it's an iterative process. And I think that it is something that we need to allow ourselves to move through the messy middle of. So with that question, we might land on one thing first, and it is only through the landing on that one thing and then sitting with that answer in the back of our minds as we keep moving through life and experiencing things, that we are able to refine it and adjust it. So it's almost like trying to come up with a perfect answer from the beginning is actually going to be the very thing that is preventing you from getting to that answer.
Yep. It's like an experiencing thing that allows you to go, oh, I'm keeping this question in the back of my mind as I go through my day, live my life. Great. Yeah. Okay. What's the next step?
So after you circle, you get some language ideas, you've jotted down these various answers, maybe you've lived in them and added to your journal. The next step of the process is to look at everything that you have and start to notice any themes and threads. And what I found with everyone who I've done this process with is that when they look at everything that they have, they typically are able to begin to group them into 5 to 10 central ideas that are coming up. And notice, well, maybe I had one answer was really around originality. Like that felt like something that's really valuable to me. And as I was answering this journal prompt, the thing that was coming up was creativity. Well, maybe those two belong together, or maybe honesty was something that I circled initially. But as I have sat with it and answered these other questions, I can see that honesty, while yes, important to me, perhaps it belongs under the umbrella of integrity. And that's the thing that is central and core to me. And then I think the most fun part of the process is you go through your different value groupings and you choose one word that feels like it really encapsulates the core, the root, the central theme of why all of these different words and bullet points are important to you. And many people have described this process when you land on the name of the value that just feels right. You can, there's something within you. You feel this sense of harmony. Everything just comes together. It just feels like, ooh, yes, that's the right word for me. And then you can look at each of your 5 to 8 values and come up with some sort of statement, some sort of description, a couple of additional words, maybe a sentence that demonstrates what that value means to you specifically. So, for example, one of my core values is compassion. And the value statement that I have for compassion is showing genuine care and empathy to everyone that I interact with, and radiating a sense of like warmth and kindness. So that is what compassion means to me. And it might mean something else to someone else. But as you can see, these descriptions become instructive. How do I live in alignment with compassion? Well, when I'm interacting with people, I'm operating from a place of care and empathy. It's like that is what feels right to me. That is when I feel most aligned with myself and with who I want to be.
I love the idea that it's iterative. When I first went to become a coach, we did this in one of our sessions. So we went through this process of building a core value, naming the values. And one of mine was called the evolution of freedom. That's what I ended up titling it. And it was like freedom really stuck out to me, but there was something about the fact that like over time it shifts, right? In my early 20s, freedom meant one thing. It was like, can I live and move wherever I want and travel where I want to go and do all that? And then it changes and changes. And for me, I started to realize like, oh, freedom is actually more structured than I originally thought it was, which is why the evolution was so important. And, something I notice, as I get older is that in the same way that I think we get really stuck on this idea of like having a purpose, I think we get stuck, or you can easily get stuck on like, but these are my values, and they don't stay the same. They change, right? So like we have to be open to that.
Yeah, they evolve, and the way that we apply them can evolve. So freedom is a perfect example, because in one moment of life, that freedom might mean that the traveling, the moving around, not being tied down somewhere. And then in another moment of life, that freedom might mean having the security to know that you know what you need to do tomorrow, you know where your paycheck is coming from, you know who the people in your life supporting you are, and you find freedom through that. So your understanding of your values might shift, and the way that you apply a particular value might need to shift as you grow.
And so what do we do? Do we then like take these things and put them up on a wall and say like anything that doesn't fall in line with this, I'm not doing? Like how do we use these in a realistic and like practical way?
One of the most practical way to use your values is when it comes to making decisions. And being at a crossroads where we don't know which path to take is something that all of us have been through, and that all of us will go through many more times in our lives. And most of the time what is recommended is to make a pro and con list for any given option. And there is value in a pro and con list, I believe, in that it starts to help us break down the different elements of the different paths in front of us.
Sometimes it's just a jumble and you're like, I don't even know what I'm really talking about here. Yeah.
Exactly. You're forced to start to break down some of those elements. The issue with a pro and con list is that most of the time it doesn't capture the nuance of the decision that's really in front of us. So if you're trying to choose between two different potential job paths, let's say, if one of them has a shorter commute and commutes have never been something that you've loved, then that might be an easy, clear pro.
Right.
But if you're choosing between two job paths and one of them is going to allow you to travel for half of the year. Now, on one hand, that might be really exciting to you to be able to explore, to go to these different places. And there also might be a part of you that knows that you have a family or young children or an aging parent, and perhaps being away for so long is going to add some complexity to your family life. And so how do you neatly put that into a pro and con list? Even if you put experience new places in the pro section and you put being away from family in the con section, how do you actually weigh those against each other? Are they equal? Perhaps they're
like on a spectrum. They're not really necessarily both pros or cons.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so oftentimes when people go through making a pro and con list, if it's going to spit out a clear answer, then you probably didn't need to make the pro and con list in the beginning for the first place. Usually what happens is that you're left even more stumped, even more unsure about what to do, and just more acutely aware of how much you don't know what to do because you have all these different elements.
It feels heavier sometimes.
And it feels heavier sometimes.
Yeah.
So a process that I found really invaluable that ropes in your core values is, instead of making a traditional pro and con list, to take the different paths that you can see in front of you and your list of core values and to start to play them against one another. And again, it's not a super clear-cut process. It usually, unfortunately, I hate to report, doesn't spit out one clear answer.
Yeah.
But what it does do is it starts to shift the lens that you're looking at things through and making sure that when you're considering these various elements, when you're weighing them against one another, that you're doing it through the lens of what you have decided is actually most important to you, rather than what your mom's neighbor said last time you went to visit her, or some Instagram marketing that's coming through and making you want to live the, laptop lifestyle, whatever it might be. You're actually able to consider, if I were to take this option, if I were to go down this path, how much opportunity would there be for me to live into this value, that value, that value.
And tell me about a time that you used your core values to make a decision.
My path to get here was a little bit winding. So when I was in college, I wanted to be a teacher. So I was studying education, and I just had this nudge in the back of my mind to keep looking into the psychology and keep exploring that. And I joined the neuroscience lab, and I decided to double major in education and psych. And the excuse that I always gave myself, or the rationale for doing all of this psychology stuff on the side, was that I thought, it's going to support my teaching. The education is the thing that I want to do with my life, and all of this psychology stuff is really in support of that. It's making me a better educator. And what I came to realize as I explored that more and more was that I actually wanted to switch that around and have the psychology and the personal growth really be at the forefront, and have my background in education be supportive of that. And so there was a moment where I had to make the decision of whether I was actually going to transition out of education, out of teaching, and make the swap. And I can see now, looking back, that it, of course, was the right decision. But in the moment, I had oriented my entire trajectory around this idea of being a teacher and education, and I loved it. I loved working with children. So it was a very hard decision. I did not know what to do, but I tried to think about the different paths in front of me and compare them against my core values. And again, it is not a super clear-cut, perfect process, but For example, one of my values is simplicity. And this is kind of a funny example, and I hope that it helps demonstrate this point, because in many ways, staying being a teacher would have been simpler.
I was going to say, I'm dying to hear how entrepreneurialism is more simple than teaching.
Yes. And this is why you have to really commit to the process and being willing to go through the messiness of it, because it is not always clear cut. In many ways, staying being a teacher, getting a paycheck, doing the job that I had been doing for years, knowing where to show up every day, that was simpler in many ways. And I could see, when I examined the place that I was at, my ability to lean into the life that I wanted to live, the form of simplicity that I wanted, in being able to decide how to create my days, being able to follow the things that I wanted to follow, and the feeling of simplicity that came with that level of control. I could see that while it was further down the line, that actually stepping into this journey of entrepreneurship in the long run would most likely give me more power, more control in that realm of simplicity. So it can also be valuable when you're doing this to not just think about in the short term, but in the long term, how are these different values going to play out? And often you can see different values might play out in both paths in front of you. But when you ask the question, okay, what do I actually want though? When I see how they're playing out, what's most important to me here in this moment?
Okay, so a quick recap. Amanda's decision-making process starts with picking values that stick out to you, asking questions to clarify what matters most. I love thinking about your peak experiences. And then making sure you know, like Amanda did with simplicity, how you define and put your values into action. We'll be right back with Amanda Hilton. And we're back with Amanda Hilton.
I think it's also important to say, when it comes to making decisions, that there is some element of privilege in being able to make decisions with only our goals and living in the fullest embodiment of our values. Being able to make decisions based purely on that, it is not something that many of us can do. Many of us have responsibilities, financial considerations.
Yeah.
And so this idea of using your values as a window through which to view your decisions, view the different paths, it doesn't throw all of that out the window. It doesn't throw the need to take those very real things into account out the window. But what it does do is it helps you begin to see, okay, in this situation, given this moment, this decision that I'm making, what is most important to weigh here? Where is the pressure to do this coming from? What's coming from a very real limitation that I'm operating within? And so it can start to offer more clarity there.
So I love that. And I love how much opportunity to be aligned with my values versus, is this a pro or is this a con? Because again, it's all kind of a spectrum. And because we all, or many of us, have other responsibilities, things that we do have to make sure happen. So we're not all operating from a place of total freedom to make every decision we want to as we want to, which is, I think, actually good. Like, we have some things that do tie us down and ask us to really, hold that sort of responsibility with the things that we want to create in our lives. So I actually like that tension, and I think we kind of need it.
Yeah.
So we're not all just floating.
Yes.
But something I heard you say, just to back up around just making decisions in general, that I really liked is, it felt like it was kind of three parts. One was that when it comes to making decisions, we are addicted to the idea of certainty. Number two is that when it comes to making decisions, we are under the illusion that there's a right one and a wrong one. That was ooh, yes, that's me. And then the third was that when it comes to making decisions, we believe we can predict the future. We do have some illusion, I think, attachment to things we can't control, like the future.
Yes.
Or being totally certain. And, I was just sitting with my therapist this morning, and she was like, I really think you're going to have to get better at letting go and going into the unknown. And I was like, that sounds terrible. And that's why I'm here, because you're right. So I think we have this illusion, and then it's difficult to make decisions if that's the frame we're operating in.
Yes, we can get so hung up on what is the right decision, what's the right choice, what do I do here? And one of the most empowering mindset shifts that I've made for myself, and that I've seen in many other people as well, is to really release that idea of right and wrong. not when it comes to our morals, not when it comes to what we believe to be ethical. I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about when we're at a crossroads and we don't know which path to take. Releasing the idea that there is a right path, because when we think that there is a right decision and we just have to figure out what it is, if I could just figure out what the right decision is, then everything's going to work out for me. And it puts us in this position of trying to predict how things are going to turn out, predict the future. And the reality is that there are just so many different ways that things can unfold. When we're able to release that, say, okay, if I can lean into the belief that there's no right decision here, where does that leave me? Well, it leaves me with thinking about what's important to me here. What is actually most important for me to honor here? How do these different values play out? How does the person that I want to be and the person that I am play out within these different options? And while it's not an easy process, I think that it's one that allows us to move forward from a place that feels better and feels more empowered and allows us to release that anxiety of trying to make the right choice. And then even once we make a choice, constantly second guessing it until it's time to make the next choice.
Correct. Right. Till something else distracts us.
Exactly.
And then we're trying to get on the train in the morning or decide if we want a coffee or a muffin. You know, it's like a close friend of mine has said to me multiple times, she's like, you can't mess it up.
Exactly.
And I was like, when she said that, I was like, God, it's the simplest thing. But the idea being like, either way, you will make a choice or you will not make a choice. You'll make a non-choice.
Which is a choice in and of itself.
Happen, correct. And either way, like in personal development, I think there's an element of like non-religious spirituality.
Yeah.
And when I think about spirituality, I think a lot of times people have like their own reaction to it, which can be positive or negative based on whatever you've experienced. I imagine like wiping that away, but imagining that perhaps there's something out there supporting you that maybe you can't always see. But when you look back on your life and connect the dots, you go, oh, many times things have worked out for me. Not necessarily in the moment was I like excited about everything all the time. And sometimes I was, but that if I look back, like things are okay generally. And so I do think there's like that element of trust along with some of the practical things we do.
And, you know, over time, as you lean more into that trust, if that is something that speaks to you and resonates with you, or if you're just leaning into your values or the version of yourself that you can see yourself becoming in 6 months or whatever it might be, the more that you lean into these things that are supportive to you, the more that your brain actually begins to automate the process of doing so. So it can be a little bit hard in the beginning. It can feel like there's some friction there to lean in the direction of trust, to lean in the direction of your values. But the more that you put in the deliberate effort to do so, our brains are these incredible automating machines. That's why it's so easy for us to get stuck in what feels like unhelpful autopilot. But we can actually use that to our advantage and deliberately decide how we want to respond to these different situations, decide the mindsets that we want to approach various situations in our lives with. And the more that we stick with it, we can know that our brains are going to support us there. Our brains are going to start to take over that process and over time make it easier and easier for us to operate from that place.
I also love that you're calling out that like we are using our brains, not letting our brains like use us and tell us what to do.
Yes.
And like multiple times when you've mentioned how we define this, it's like, and I don't think we should be guided solely by our feelings or solely by our brains, but I think so many of us are solely guided by our brains and our intellects and what's logical and practical, or we are trying to do that because it feels like that's how, especially in our culture, the way that it's supposed to go. It's how you make the right choice. But there is this sort of combination of thinking, feeling, and like instinctual stuff that can support you. And I'm purposefully staying away from the conversation of like setting goals and all of that, because I think it's actually so much more important to live here than to think about goals. Like you can do all that. That's like everybody's got a list for how do we work with habits, but like I think less people focus on how do we even figure out why we're doing what we're doing.
Yes.
Okay, so we have our core kind of values. Sometimes there's an assumption that I followed the values, I made the choice to go down path A, and that aligned most with the values I cared about. But shit still hit the fan, you know, like, or it's not perfect, or it's messy, or whatever version of that is. And part of that is just life. And then part of it is also like coming up against ourselves and our own sort of limiting beliefs that can show up. And I know you talk a bit about that. So I'd love to just like, can we explore the limiting beliefs kind of world? Like, what are those and how do we work with them?
Some of the beliefs that might pop up in our minds, like, I'm not smart enough, I'm not good enough, those are so obviously limiting to us. Those so obviously can shape our perception of ourselves in a way that doesn't necessarily lend itself to us doing the best we can. It can really put a damper in our self-trust and self-confidence. So those are the more obvious ones. But what I often encourage people to explore are the beliefs that you find coming up that don't necessarily feel negative. They're not so obviously negative, but they might be something that is not necessarily true and that aren't serving you. They are the things that when we tell it to ourselves over and over again, it's not helping us do the things we want to be or be the people that we want to be. So, for example, one of the limiting beliefs that I have been working through a lot recently is the belief that I'm so busy. And now someone might look at that and say, well, that's not really a belief. That's just your calendar is full. You have this long to-do list. You are busy. And that's what I would tell myself. I am busy. I have so many things to do. I have so many appointments, so many things that I have to check off. What I found is that the more that I would tell myself I'm so busy, the more anxiety I would feel, the more I felt like I couldn't get things done, the more I was creating a blocker in my own path to actually moving forward. And so I have shifted that belief into I focus on the things that matter most to me.
I mean, the busy thing is it's so universal, and a lot of us now associate being busy with mattering. When I did this at lunch earlier, I saw someone I hadn't seen in a long time, and I was like, I'm sorry, I'm running, but I want to see you. And I was like, ugh. I just hate doing that. Like, I actually don't like it. Like, I don't really want to be defined or defining myself in that way. But there is certainly like a little bit of like people going, oh, that person's busy. That means that they're doing something important.
Yes. And so if you feel yourself running up against a feeling that you're like, this story, this belief doesn't feel good, I'm not feeling great in this moment, a helpful question can be, what would be a more helpful story here? So a more helpful story for me around being busy is that I'm focusing on the things that matter most to me. And so you can just ask that, play around with it a little bit. And again, the more that you repeat this to yourself, the more that you notice it coming up and actively, consciously reframe it, which is not easy at the beginning, but it becomes easier and easier over time.
So like, what about the beliefs though that aren't necessarily just like the very clear, like I'm dumb or I'm not enough, which I think is a very common belief for most of us, right? So I don't want to like throw that aside, but the beliefs like I can't do something, or even just like that's just the way I am, which is, I think, also like a disguised limiting belief that we use to like sometimes just to like talk about our behavior in a way that can make it feel acceptable without having to take about accountability for it. How do we work with those? Like the I can'ts, that's just how I am, like as we're going through this process?
One of the best places to start, especially with beliefs like that, is when I tell this to myself, how is it actually helping me? Because our brains are so smart, and most of the things that our brains serve up to us, it has some underlying, perhaps it's not the most helpful, perhaps it's not the most eloquent reasoning, but it has some reasoning behind it. It has some way that it is serving us. So by saying, this is just the way I am, how is that serving me? Well, it's helping me not feel guilty when I don't then try to make a different choice, because this is just the way that I am. Of course,
and maybe it's preserving energy.
Exactly.
Like, so I don't have to care about the thing.
Exactly. So when we ask ourselves, how is this actually serving me? We can begin to see the way that our brains, our loving, smart, incredible brains that are trying to support us, when you see the way that it's trying to serve you by helping you conserve energy or giving you an excuse so that you don't have to stand up in front of people and perhaps not perform the best that you want to perform.
Right.
When you see the way that it's trying to protect you, you're able to see with more clarity, okay, I can see that it's trying to protect me in this way, but actually from my wiser perspective, from when I zoom out a little bit, I can see that this is not worth it to me. It's not worth it to me to hold on to this belief because it's limiting me in this other way. What's that quote? Like, when you argue for your limitations, you get to keep them.
LOL.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
It reminds me of like I'd stopped running for a while because I had an injury, and then I started to run again. And I was running with my partner, and he's fast, right? And so I, in long distance, can't run super fast. And so that's what I would say before we started. I was like, no, 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 no. My pace it was like 9:30. And I'm like, that's all I can do if we're going to be running 7 miles or more. And he would always say to me like, well, why don't you just run and then see how it goes?
Yeah.
Instead of already deciding before you get out on the road that
Yeah.
you cannot go any faster. And I was like, oh, I made up a limit. And part of that making up of the limit was self-protective because I used to run track.
Yeah.
And so running track was all about sprinting. I was a sprinter, right? And so it gave me anxiety. And so I was trying to avoid feeling anxious.
Yes.
And so to avoid feeling anxious, I put a number as the max I could do because that max felt safe.
Yes. That story reminded me not just how is this protecting me, but what part of me is this protecting? Oh, this is protecting the high schooler who was like a track star and is afraid of not being able to run super fast.
I love that you say part because I think sometimes we can pull ourselves into like this all-encompassing thing. Well,
Yeah.
I'm this, not that.
Yeah.
I'm a this, I'm not that, versus like, no, this part of me is trying to hold on to this or it's wanting this,
Yeah.
versus all of it. All of it is all of me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And with this conversation around limiting beliefs, I do think it's important to bring in the idea of very real limitations. And I think that the word limitations can get such a bad reputation. It can feel so negative, so constricting. But again, I think that in the personal development space, there's too much of the messaging around you are your only limitation.
Yeah.
You have the same 24 hours in a day as Beyonce. Have you heard that one?
But it's different.
But it's different.
Right.
But it's different, maybe technically. I think there's a lot of that messaging being jammed down our throats that we are the only thing standing in our way. And while it is so true that the beliefs that we've picked up might not be allowing us to shine as bright as we can shine, it is true that we do place limitations on ourselves. And it's also true that we operate within a certain context. We operate within financial realities. We operate within certain responsibilities. Social identities, exactly. Privilege. So many things play into this. And so being able to look really honestly and say, what bounds am I operating within right now? It allows you to redirect your attention to where your control does lie, because there always is something that is within your control. And when you look with honesty and with love and with care at what the genuine limitations are, what the genuine conditions that you're operating within are, you're able to reclaim your ability to focus on what is within your control and to use your agency to impact that.
I used to hate when people said be realistic.
Yeah.
And I actually don't anymore. But I used to hate it because I thought possibilities all need to be endless. And I do think there's a fine line you walk with the idea of quote unquote being realistic. But I like the point of like operating within the current circumstance you find yourself in. And then that circumstance will shift. It will grow. It will shrink.
And that's the key. That's the key, is that those external quote unquote limitations, when we look at that in any given moment, we can take steps to change certain elements of our circumstance. So moment to moment, goal to goal, different thing that we might be moving through, that those realities will shift and change. So it doesn't mean that these are the realities that you're going to be operating within forever.
Sure.
But in any given moment, you want to make sure that you are putting all of the attention that you can on what you can actually control, because that is going to be your clearest path to moving forward.
Limiting, as we're talking about, can be viewed as like something that's keeping me from like shining as bright as I can shine. When we don't pull that apart, I think sometimes we can also get so outsized, especially because of, again, the culture we live in. I think especially for millennials and people in Gen Z, there is this like need and desire and drive to be seen, and that to be seen by mass groups of people is to be important, is to matter, right? And so I wonder if there's just a way that you would define limiting. And the way I just thought about it is like, is this thought, behavior, or feeling keeping me from living the life I want to live? Like that feels less one size fits all for how we're supposed to be removing limiting beliefs and who we have to become once we remove them. And more like, well, what am I doing? What do I want?
Yeah, I love that definition. Is this preventing me from living the life I want to live? And is this preventing me from being the person that I want to be? Who is it that I want to be? And is this serving me in that?
And that's why we define core values.
Exactly.
Because of that tells us who do I, at least today, say that I want to be. All right, I'm going to have you answer these 3 statements for me.
Okay.
The first is better humans are.
Better humans are more connected to what matters to them.
Better work is.
Better work is lighter, not because meaningful and deep work isn't important, but when we are able to connect and create harmony between who we are and the work that we're doing and the way that we're living our lives, there's simultaneously a certain depth and a certain levity that comes with it.
Love that. And a better world has.
A better world has more understanding.
Thank you so much for being here, Amanda. This was awesome. That was wellness researcher and personal growth educator Amanda Hilton. You can find her on most social platforms and at her website, thesimply.well.com. If this conversation resonated with you, share it with the first person who comes to mind. You never know how it could help them out. And support other people like you in finding our show by leaving us a rating before you go. While you're at it, write a 1-sentence review telling me and the team what you love about Everyday Better. And as always, you can get me in your inbox by signing up for our weekly personal development newsletter, giving you practical tips on how to level up with small steps every day. Find it in our show notes for this episode or at linkedin.com/everydaybetter. That's linkedin.com/everydaybetter. Everyday Better is a production of LinkedIn News. The show is produced by Grace Rubin and Emily Reeves. Asaf Gadron is our sound engineer. He makes sure we sound good in the studio. Joe DeGiorgi mixed our show. Enrique Montalvo is the executive producer of LinkedIn Editorial Productions. Dave Pond is head of news production. Courtney Koop is head of LinkedIn Original Audio and Video. Dan Roth is the editor-in-chief of LinkedIn. And I'm Leah Smart. Thanks for coming with me, and I'll see you next week.